Good evening, everyone. Appreciate you joining us. This is Lawrence Brinson, Chair of the NCAE Black Caucus. We want to thank you for tuning in to listen to voting rights and election integrity. As we all know that this is one of the most important elections in our lifetime. I feel like we say that every time there's an election, but this is truly one of the most important elections of our lifetime. And one of the things that's very key for us is to make sure we understand rights as well as maintaining the integrity of our elections. Our guest panelists for tonight include Caitlin Kaiser with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, Dr. Kerry Haney with Duke University, and Executive Director Bob Phillips. And I'm not going to delay. I'm going to let them get started and introduce themselves in their own way as we go through tonight. Feel free to drop anything in the chat. Thank you.
Let me share my screen. Let me start. Good evening, everyone. I'm Caitlin Kaiser. I am the Voting Rights Legal Fellow at Southern Coalition for Social Justice. I'm so excited to be here tonight and speak with you all. I'm going to go through, I'll let you guys all know a little bit about Southern Coalition for Social Justice, what you need to know for voting in 2020. As Lawrence said, this year is unlike other years. How you can get involved with the election process, and then what happens after the election. So we just finished the 2020 census, and so now we need to look forward to redistricting. Who is the Southern Coalition for Social Justice? So our mission is to equip economically disadvantaged communities and communities of color across the South to advance their own social, political, and economic rights. Our work is community-centered and community-driven. To do this, we use a variety of resources such as legal advocacy, research, organizing, and communications. We work with partners not only in North Carolina, but across the South, from Virginia to Texas. And as John Lewis says, we like to make good trouble. So in order to do that, we have our voting rights team, which I'm a part of, and we have a justice system reforms team with also within that deals with youth justice project. On the voting rights team, we advocate for electoral restructures that encourage meaningful civic engagement and for governmental systems that hold elected officials accountable. And to do this, we advocate for fair redistricting plans, oppose voter suppression, and advocate for electoral reforms that expand access to voting. And so what voters need to know for 2020. So the first and most important thing is you need to make a voting plan and do it now. If you haven't thought about how to vote, what you're going, when you're going to vote, I hope everyone takes a moment after this amazing event and really sits down and think, picking a day you're going to vote, the method you're going to vote by, either by mail or in person, either that on election day or early voting. And if you need to make any type of arrangements, so thinking about childcare or making arrangements if you're taking care of a loved one, potentially, or even your pets, needing to take a day off of work or arrangement to transportation for polls. Or if you're going to, go to the polls with your family, making sure everyone has that day off. Another important thing is the lines for early voting have been long. So make sure that you make, wearing some comfortable clothes, considering the elements. So I know the North Carolina weather has been hot some days and cold other days. So maybe bringing a sweater, an umbrella, a hat, and some food with you, some snacks, some sandwiches. And then also something that's so important is to make sure that you check, if you're going to actually go to the polls in this election season, make sure you check your registration status before you go. So you can know that once you get there, that you won't have any issues by preventing you to vote, such as an inactive registration or potentially needing to show some proof of residency. This year, due to Southern Coalitions for Social Justice's litigation advocacy, there will be no voter will have to show any form of voter ID, so any type of photo identification. Another important thing to know is if you're going to be voting by mail, this is not a new way of voting, but it's not the norm for many voters, including myself. This year was the first time I voted by absentee, and I was actually concerned. I think that there has been a lot of information out there that's saying, how will my absentee ballot, make it to the post office? Will it make it to the County Board of Elections? But this year, North Carolina has adopted ballot tracks, which if you're going to vote by mail, you can easily track where your ballot is in the process. Important step is in regards to voting by mail. It's a two-step process. The first step is you need to request your absentee ballot. And the second step is you need to complete that absentee ballot and actually send it back or hand it in person to either our early voting site or the County Board of Elections. Really important though, the deadline to request an absentee ballot is October 27th. And the County Board of Elections needs to receive that request by 5 p.m. So here at Southern Coalition for Social Justice, we're recommending everyone that if you're going to think about absentee voting, that you need to make that request in by now. And you can do that actually by using an online portal that the state board has set up. And the way to use that, you just need to have either a driver's license or DMV issued ID or your last 4 digits of your social security number. And if you've already completed your absentee ballot, it's important that you follow all the directions, and that includes the voter needs to sign your absentee ballot, and the witness needs to print their name and address and sign it. I think probably many of you have heard a lot in the news about these curable deficiencies or issues with witnesses, and Southern Coalition for Social Justice has just recently secured relief when a judge has provided that voters need to have timely notice and an opportunity to be heard if there's a problem with your absentee ballot. And so we filed this lawsuit against the State Board of Elections during the summertime to ensure that every voter that decides to utilize absentee by mail is able to have their vote counted and is able to vote with confidence, knowing that if they make a mistake, it can be easily fixed. And these mistakes, which are considered to be deficiencies, are in 2 types of categories. There's curable deficiencies, which is like if you have forgotten to sign, if you signed in the wrong place, your witness or assistant did not print their name, or if the witness or assistant signed on the wrong place, that's considered to be a curable mistake. And if that occurs, you have the opportunity to cure that mistake by sending the County Board of Elections a cure certificate. And the County Board of Elections will notify you if you fall into that category of your absentee ballot needs to be cured, which is great. That has not happened in previous years, and so that's something new. Another thing to be aware of is that if you potentially have a deficiency or mistake that's not curable, that's going to fall under the category where the County Board of Elections is going to have to mail you an actual new ballot, and then you'll have to complete that ballot. And that is like, those mistakes are such as when a witness did not sign, or if the envelope appears to be unsealed, or even if the voter decides, you want to spoil that ballot. And then another important thing is opportunities to vote early. So early voting runs through October 15th through October 31st. And every County Board of Elections sets their own hours of operation, but they will be uniformed across the county. And Southern Coalition for Social Justice on their website has amazing resources where you can find out, your polling place, those hours of operation, and where the address is located. And during early voting, if you miss the deadline to register, which was on October 9th, you can actually register and vote the same day. And that's a really great way to, if you get to the polls during early voting and the poll worker says, oh, I see that you're not registered, you are inactive, you have the opportunity to register and vote that same day. And if you are registering to vote during early voting, it's important that you bring some form of proof of your residence. So this is not necessarily a photo ID. It can be one, such as your driver's license or a DMV issued ID, but it can also be your utility bill, a bank statement, some form of government document, a paycheck, and that just needs to have your name and your current address. It also can be an electronic copy. And in regards for students, students can bring their school ID plus a school document showing the student's address. And again, I want to reiterate that no voter this year will be asked to show some form of photo ID when going to the polls. And that's in large part due to our litigation in the case called Holmes, which stopped the constitutional amendment that voters in North Carolina approved in 2018 from taking place in this year's election. And moreover, on election day, all polls will be open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. and all voters in line by 7:30 p.m. must be allowed to vote. No voter will be turned away if they are in line by 7:30 p.m. But just make sure this year, I know I've heard a lot of people say, I always go to the same polling place every year, and that's never changed. But remember that this year it might have changed due to social distancing requirements at the polls. And so just make sure that you are, before you go to the polls, either on election day or early voting, that you're checking that the polling place that you usually go to is the same. And in order to do that, there is, a great resource called 888 Our Vote. And you can use that hotline at any point of time to either call to check your registration status, to see where your absentee ballot is, to even report forms of voter intimidation or vote suppression. That hotline is there for all voters to use to be able to find out this information. And I see that I have got my 10 minutes and I don't want to use up all the space, but thank you.
Okay, you're fine. I mean, if you have anything else you want to add, but one question before we go to Dr. Haney is, so if someone has an absentee ballot or are in the process of absentee and they change their mind and they want to vote in person, is that possible?
So that is definitely possible. So if you are someone who requested an absentee ballot and you think, I want to go to the polls, I feel more comfortable to go to the polls, you can just throw away that absentee ballot and go to the polls. As long as you have not actually submitted that absentee ballot and put it in the mail, if it's just blank, you can definitely go to the polls and vote. You don't have to worry about that. And I also want to, on top of that, if you actually did vote by absentee but had one of those curable deficiencies, or your ballot ended up needing to be spoiled, so you had to be issued a new ballot, you can still go to the polls and early vote. You just need to call your county board of elections and let them know that you want to spoil that ballot, and then you can go to the polls and vote in person too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, Dr. Haney.
Yes. So good evening. I'm Kerry Haney. I teach political science and African American studies at Duke University. Been at Duke for about 17 years. But my home is actually up the road from where you all are. I presume if you're in Charlotte or Mecklenburg County. I grew up in Kannapolis, and my mom and siblings are still there. Not getting there as much as I like to these days, but I get there from time to time. So one of the things I want to say tonight is that it's an old story, and that is that we find ourselves yet again having to outwork, out-organize, and out-participate the other side. I grew up, I'm 57 years old, and I remember going with my mother to vote for the first time in 1968. I was 5. Over in Kannapolis. And here we are again, facing some of the same hurdles that were present back in the 1960s. And I'll tell a story about the Southern Coalition, Caitlin, that as a political scientist, when now Justice Anita Earls, who was the executive director of the Southern Coalition some years ago, came over to Duke and did a presentation for us. And one of the questions I asked, what is it that academics like me who do research, what can we do to help the cause of voting rights and voter protection? And she said, oddly enough, we need you to go back and do what you all did 20, 30 years ago. And that was doing basic research, providing data and information, evidence that could be used in courts when they go to court, when you guys go to court to litigate these issues. We found that judges were beginning to say, well, Voting Rights Act and that data, that's 30 years ago. Tell me that's still happening now. Didn't we elect a Black president? So how can you then now claim that there's still voter suppression or problems with voting rights, the fact that we have elected Barack Obama? So the more things change, the more they stay the same. One of the things that is not the same, and this is something I want to stress, and I stress over and over again, and that is Black and brown voters have the power and the potential to determine the outcomes of elections in North Carolina and many other places. The authority, the power, and the potential to determine the outcomes of elections in North Carolina and many other places. And this is going to be true for the foreseeable future. And some evidence of that, right? I think the strongest evidence is what Republicans and others have been doing for the last 20, 30 years, right? So voter ID laws. So think about when those came into fashion. Reducing the number of early voting days, when for decades the talk was about expanding opportunity to vote. Everyone should vote. And all of a sudden we're in a moment of trying to restrict the right to vote. And these efforts have been stepped up since around about 2008, when Barack Hussein Obama was elected as president of the United States. You can trace and draw a straight line back to that election and his re-election to these efforts now to restrict the vote. There's been a major demographic shift in the country where Black and brown voters are becoming a larger percentage of the population and the electorate, and becoming a larger percentage of the electorate in key places. So if you look at the electoral map this cycle, North Carolina is in play, Georgia is in play, Texas is in play, Florida is close. Now, quite a bit of that, the reason why that is the growing presence of Black and brown voters as members of the electorate. Now, the key is to make sure that potential becomes realized. And that's where I've been troubled for a number of years, that we haven't out-worked, out-organized, and out-mobilized the other side when we have the ability within our own hands to do so. I worry about the Democratic Party in this regard, right, where most of the Black and brown voters tend to align. An example, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton as the Democratic Party nominee, it was just strange to me that come October, September, October, that the Clinton campaign was spending as much as they did on ads. If you didn't like Hillary Clinton or was not going to support Hillary Clinton and didn't know who she was by September or October in 2016, you were not going to know or you were not going to support her. I thought that money would have been better spent in coming in on the ground and getting the ground game to turn voters out, to do voter education, to get folks to the polls. And that effort seems to have died down. When I was growing up, my mother and other folks in the neighborhood had voter lists. And they were responsible for getting the folks on their list to the polls come hell or high water or both, right? And that's what they did. The campaigns have moved to sort of sophisticated computer-based models for turnout, and that's fine. But nothing beats the old knocking on the doors, having folks in the neighborhood who know people in the neighborhood, making those calls, knocking on those doors, and getting those folks to the poll. One thing I observed in North Carolina and in other states, and this is an advantage, I think, that Black and brown communities have. So there are some African-American legislators in the state house, and they live in these districts, right? In the majority, for the most part, majority Black districts. Those districts ought to have turnout that exceeds the state average, right? If those politicians who have been elected with Black and brown votes can't turn out, 50, 60, 70% of the voters in their district, there's something wrong. And so we need to hold people accountable once they are elected for paying attention to the folks who sent them to their office. And this is an opportunity that we missed, that to use legislators to make sure that they're, so in these districts, right, you can win with 20% turnout. That's good for that individual, but there are other issues and other offices that matter. And so if you don't settle for the 20% turnout in your district and aim for 30, 40, 50%, that makes a difference across the state. Had that happened 4 years ago, if you recall, right, we waited a couple of weeks, a week at least, to know whether we had who's the governor, right? So the Cooper-McCrory race went over sometime. Had there been a couple percentage point turnout in these majority Black districts, Hillary Clinton would have won the state of North Carolina and won other states that she lost around the country. So the party's not putting the effort into the turnout. But my message is that we shouldn't wait and rely on the party. Yes, they should be doing it, but we can't wait and expect that to happen. We can do that ourselves. And the same with organizing and getting out to vote. Yes, they should be doing it, but we can't wait for that. We never waited for that. It never comes sometimes, but we can make a difference if we do the things that are within our authority to do. Also, I think supporting organizations like the Southern Coalition and others in terms of their legal strategies, that's important. But we also know the wheels of justice grind slowly. So while we are going to court, while we are supporting those efforts, while we're litigating, we should also be organizing, mobilizing, and getting folks to the polls. And I'll stop there, and I look forward to your questions.
I remember the voter list. I was one of those when Harvey Gantt was running for U.S. Senate. They had the list and going door to door. So I remember those. And before I move on to Mr. Phillips, and by you being at Duke University and seeing a lot of young people, do you see that with that turnout, because there's always enthusiasm, but it seems when it gets to the vote that group 18 to 25 or maybe somewhere in between, is there anything to say about that group not voting?
What we've seen, and surprisingly, and I think fortunately, right, so we've seen an increase, an uptick in young folks at the colleges voting. And this is key in North Carolina. We have a large number of colleges and universities. And in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, they've been really mobilized and organized on campuses, and that's led to higher turnout. Now, this year is odd, right? Because, we're in this pandemic and, our students are not on campus in the numbers that they normally are. And if they are, don't have the ability to come together and organize like they once did. So that's one thing to watch in a couple of weeks as whether we have that turnout. But it is key, and they are more interested these days than in years past. They are, have been forced to be interested given some of the things that are at stake. And particularly in our historically Black colleges and universities around the state. In this particular election cycle, I see an energy, in part because we have now a HBCU grad on the ticket, yes, on the Democratic side, HBCU sorority member, and that's not unimportant in this state with a large number of historically Black colleges and universities. So I do see an uptick in that, but I worry about what that turnout might be given the pandemic. Another thing I'll say about this, and one reason some evidence is why that vote's become more important and it's increasing. Again, look at the reaction to what happened on the other side. In the last couple of election cycles, there have been efforts to remove from college campuses polling places, right? So Duke had a polling place for years that went away for a cycle, and we had to fight to get it back, and that was true at Appalachian State and other places around the country where college students were turning out, and the Republicans thought that vote was a Democratic vote, largely is, and they wanted to sort of suppress that and limit that voting bloc.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, I need to make you a co-host.
Okay. Or
are you a co-host now?
Maybe I am. It looks like okay. I have an ability to share the screen, which I'll try to do. Okay. I can't really tell.
Okay.
I probably got more years on anyone than anyone on the call here. But Lawrence, let me congratulate you and the NCAE Black Caucus. I'm actually a proud product of Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, probably, Lawrence, before you were born. But I did tell you my mom was a school teacher at Amy James and Sterling Elementary. I don't know whether either one of those schools still exists back in the day. And my dad was a deputy superintendent. And again, these are names I knew. And I know everyone's deceased now, but E.E. Waddell and Cat Crosby, for those of you who may know those names, that kind of dates me back to Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, for what it's worth. I will say I'm pleased that Dr. Haney, I know I've not met you before, but I'm pleased to know that you're a fellow Tar Heel graduate, just as I am. I appreciate Duke University tremendously, but my heart bleeds light blue, and I'm sure maybe yours does too. And I'll just say with Caitlin, goodness, we would not have good voting laws, if I want to say that we do, or better voting laws than we do, were it not without the fine folks at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Common Cause, we've been a plaintiff, a client before with SCSJ, and I can't thank them enough for the great work they do. I'm going to attempt now to share my screen here, so let's see if this works. Let's see, do you all see that? Or not?
No.
Well, let me see. I've got I don't know, Lawrence. Maybe I'm either doing something wrong on my end, or I can't seem to share my screen. So you all are not seeing it.
No.
I'm going to try one more thing here. No, I guess, I don't know. I don't know really what I'm doing wrong here. Let me just, I'll read what I was going to read, and or just kind of go over through the same things. Common Cause, we're like SCSJ, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and holding power accountable is essentially our motto. We work on a variety of reforms, essentially advocates for more open, honest, and accountable government. You know, unfortunately in North Carolina, we have a sad legacy of voter suppression and disenfranchisement. And the 1899 Constitution ratified poll taxes and literacy tests were put in place, essentially disenfranchising Black men. Women, of course, did not have the right to vote until 1920. And even in modern times, as Caitlin mentioned and Dr. Haney mentioned as well, we've seen voter suppression. Certainly in the last decade, the North Carolina General Assembly passed arguably the worst voter suppression laws in the land. And again, thanks to a lot of good groups, SCSJ included, many of those were reversed. So we entered the 2020 election with some good news, and that is that there's no photo voter ID required. That's in litigation, as again, Caitlin mentioned. We did get restored the full 17-day early voting period. October 15th is when it started, and goes through Saturday, October 31st. And again, one thing Caitlin mentioned, which is so important, is same-day voter registration, which allows anyone to register, adjust their registration simultaneously with voting all the way up until that last Saturday before the election day. That's October 31st. So all good things. So in this crazy year we're in, the pandemic and just all the things that are happening in our world, we have three viable options to cast a ballot. North Carolina does not have a tradition of voting by mail, but it has become obviously a choice for more people. And what we have seen, obviously, is just an unprecedented, I guess, demand for ballots. And when I checked earlier today, 640-some thousand ballots have been turned in. And we have had most people, it's running about 98% statewide and about the same for Mecklenburg County, successfully cast an absentee ballot. Unfortunately, the problems that we see, there is a disproportionate number of African American voters who have had some witness signature discrepancies, mostly is what it is. And when you do vote by mail, of course, you have to sign the ballot and have a witness do the same, and the witness must print their name and put their address. If there are discrepancies by law, the voter must be alerted within 1 business day, also emailed or texted that there is a problem, and then they're also provided information of how to resolve it. It's October 27th. That's just, 6 days away before, or rather, the deadline for requesting an absentee ballot. That's October 27th. So what Common Cause is currently recommending anyone is to simply, if you can, vote early. Just go to an early voting site and take care of it. Even if you have a discrepancy right now with your absentee ballot, as Caitlin mentioned, you don't have to vote that ballot. You can simply go to an early voting site and vote, and your absentee ballot will be spoiled. All of us, every ballot has a unique barcode. That barcode is also at the precinct. And so when you vote, that automatically will spoil your absentee ballot. So of course, none of us can actually vote twice, like someone recommended, I think, in North Carolina a month ago. I will say then the other option, of course, voting early, which started October 15th. And again, we've seen an unprecedented number of folks do that. I think we're up to 1.4 million plus. In Mecklenburg County, you have 33 early voting sites, which is 10 more than what you had in 2016. And really, that's the great success in North Carolina. I really applaud our State Board of Elections for doing this. And you look at Georgia, a neighboring state, and they're having tremendous problems right now. Lines that might last 10 hours long. Now, we have had some lines in North Carolina, but what's the difference? We have twice as many early voting sites across North Carolina as we did in 2016. We have longer days. In other words, the early voting sites open up at 8 o'clock in the morning and go till 7:30. In 2016, they didn't open up until 10 and they shut down at 7. We have more weekend options too. Last Sunday, there were 240 early voting Sunday sites in the state, whereas in 2016, there had only been 41. So longer hours, more early voting sites, and more flexibility in the days with regards to weekends is creating many more options for us to vote early. And I think that's what we're seeing in North Carolina, why so many people are choosing that route to go. I think, and I don't have my numbers in front of me, I had it on my PowerPoint, but I believe in Mecklenburg County, you've had about 125,000 voters vote early, 38% of those being African American. So again, you're off to a great start in the, as I affectionately call Charlotte, the great state of Mecklenburg. That's, giving some deference to Charlotte. Finally, I'll just say, of course, November 3rd, Election Day, 6:30 a.m. to 7:30, the normal election hours, all those normal precincts should be open. There could be some changes, and if there are that affect you, you were to have been notified, obviously, by your Mecklenburg County Board of Elections. The combination of early voting and vote by mail has our elections officials projecting that we might have 80% of the vote in when we wake up on Election Day. And that's important to note because, one, that means Election Day probably won't be chaotic, at least we hope not. And I should say, too, note that there are strong laws against intimidation. And if anyone sees anything outside the precincts or inside, you should report it to the precinct judge immediately. But the one thing, too, regarding having so many of the votes in, we won't have to necessarily wait. I do want to say that the outcome of an election on election night is just a snapshot, and it's not official till all the ballots are counted. But 5 weeks before the election and beginning September 29th, the absentee ballots that were coming in across the state started being tabulated. That means that they were being opened up, flattened, and run through a tabulator. Some states, Pennsylvania being one, They're not allowed to begin this until after the polls close on election day. What a mess. At least in North Carolina, we are already tabulating those absentee ballots. So we won't be necessarily waiting days or weeks. And I sure hope that's not the case really for any state, but we shouldn't be in too much of a delay here. Last two things, and again, I'm sorry my PowerPoint doesn't work. I need some lessons, I guess, in Technology 101 here, but a couple of good sources for information. The Mecklenburg County Board of Elections is great. And I believe it's MECGov, MECSDE.gov, I believe. Or Lawrence, you might have to check that for me again. I had that on my PowerPoint and I'm going to forget it. But the last thing I'll say too is another good source for information on how, when, and where to vote is also, as well as candidate information, is a voter guide that Common Cause and our good friends at Democracy North Carolina co-produce. And you can find that at ncvoterguide.org. That's ncvoterguide.org. It's a nonpartisan guide. You can plug in your address. It'll tell you where to vote, your options of where. It'll give you your customized ballot, and it will also provide tons of great information about where the candidates are on many issues that are relevant to you. So apologies to everybody that you had to look at me and listen to me for maybe longer than you should have. I'll have to learn how to do a PowerPoint better, but I'll turn it back to you, Lawrence.
Oh, you're fine. And yes, my son went, Amy James is still standing. My son went to Amy James pre-K, so it's still there. And I actually teach around the corner at Philip O'Berry, so it's still there.
That's great.
Just a couple of questions, and this is for anyone. The first question is, it sounds like the ballots being curable is one of the most pressing issues. Outside of that, what would you see is maybe the second most pressing issue that's facing our voters now, as far as suppression goes?
I'll say, and I'll certainly will defer to others that will have something, but I know in terms of an issue is just that feeling of safety, and maybe that's not suppression, but again, in this pandemic where voters are, we all are worried about this. And as you may know, a voter is not required to wear a mask inside to vote, encouraged, but not required. But the good news is the poll workers are properly attired for this. There's masks, I think, will be available for the voters, and there's certainly the things that a voter can be made to feel comfortable and safe. But I think that's certainly one of the big factors that I would say is facing all of us as we might be considering to cast an in-person ballot.
I think another, going off that point, thinking about safety, but also just circulation of misinformation that is currently happening. And that misinformation might either, suppress people from going to the polls or, have the opportunity of disenfranchising people. So making sure that the information that you're hearing or receiving or even giving to people, is accurate. And if there's any point in time where you hear something and you think, is that correct? Or like, am I hearing that properly? Or even going to the polls and a poll worker telling you like, no, you're not registered, when you previously checked and saw that you're registered. So that type of misinformation, is harmful and does suppress the vote. And so how can you get, correct information? And I think, utilizing the 888 Our Vote hotline, utilizing information that is found, on the State Board of Elections website, on Southern Coalition for Social Justice's website, going to Democracy North Carolina, and Common Cause has amazing resources where you can check and have information that is correct, that has been already resourced to prove that that is correct, and that you can actually bring it up on your phone and have that there, or call and talk to and a volunteer and receive proper information, whether that is, if you were turned away from the polls because a poll worker said that you're, not registered, or if you saw voter, intimidation at the polls or, or outside the polls, you can report that. So just making sure that the information that you're receiving, is correct, And that information, is not making you fearful of your vote either not being counted, or fearful that if you go to the polls, that you might be turned away. So just making sure that the information you're receiving or hearing, is correct. I think that's a big issue. And I mean, we hear it in the news all the time, misinformation being turned around, and it is, confusing, and that confusion can cause people to be fearful that their vote might not be counted. And we want to make sure, especially in this election cycle, that people aren't having that fear.
One thing I'll add is the intimidation that Caitlin referred to is a possibility. The president encouraged his supporters, presumably some among those maybe militia, in places where you can carry if you have a permit, right? That could be a source of intimidation for voters. So I do think make sure you have the numbers and the resources at your fingertips when you go vote and report any type of activity. We have strong, as Bob said, laws against that type of intimidation. But we need to make sure that we are prepared, make a plan, and be prepared when you show up.
So I have a couple more, and then I'm going to give each of you a chance to just leave us with some final words. The second chance voting, opportunities for felons or convicted felons or people who have served their time to be able to vote again. If, this is for anyone, if you could just say anything that you're doing or any information that people on the call might need to know.
So I can start off. So Southern Coalition for Social Justice is also working with another organization called Forward Justice in order to make sure that people who have been previously incarcerated or with a felony conviction, or people who are currently in jail have the opportunity to vote. And so if you are currently in jail, awaiting your trial, not having a conviction yet, you do have the opportunity to vote. And so if you have a loved one, they can call the hotline 888-HOUR-VOTE and get information about how you can receive an absentee ballot, while you're waiting in jail, and to be able to vote that. Another issue that has been currently circulating is people who have served their felony sentence, have finished their probation, have finished their parole, now have the opportunity to vote. And so making sure that you are re-registered, have the opportunity to re-register, and then be able to go to the polls and vote. And so that is, making sure that everyone has the all eligible voters have the opportunity to vote. And so you can utilize the 888-HOUR-VOTE hotline if you have any questions about, whether or not you are eligible to vote and can secure that vote in this upcoming election.
I'll just add, as Caitlin mentioned, there are a lot of folks who are incarcerated who have a legal right to vote, and it's all about getting education. And I'm happy to say that last week we dropped 2,000 voter guides to the Mecklenburg County jail. Sheriff McFadden was very kind to let us do that. And the number one reason people don't vote often is because of a lack of information. And we want everybody to have that information, and particularly folks who currently, again, may be incarcerated, but again, have a legal right to vote. So we're doing that. We're also trying to provide these nonpartisan voter guides also to jails in the major cities, or counties, I should say, Forsyth, Guilford, Wake, Durham, and Cumberland. But as Caitlin mentioned, absentee ballot voting is the way that they have to cast that ballot, and it is important that they know how to do that. So that was good information, obviously, Caitlin, that you provided. Hopefully with the voter guides, folks will then be able to make an informed decision.
And I think another point in regards of, thinking about second chances, thinking, Common Cause had to drop, those voter guides off at, in those jails. I think it just says a lot from the state and from other, legislative actors about the silence in regards of, not advocating for people who are incarcerated and have that, are eligible to vote, to make that vote. And so that's a form of voter suppression, and suppressing the vote for people who are incarcerated and who are eligible to vote. And we want to make sure that, that doesn't happen. And so getting out the vote and making sure people do have that, information and are eligible to vote and can make that vote. So making sure that, expanding the access to everyone to vote.
So what I'm going to do is, I do want to just briefly bring up what happened in California with the drop-off boxes. I don't know if you all paid attention to that. Do any of you have anything to say about the drop-off boxes and things of that nature?
No, I'll just say what I just reiterate what Caitlin said. Make sure you get accurate information, proper information about how to vote, where to vote, and what you need access to when you do that, because all kinds of shenanigans won't be the last that we see of this. Something like this happens in every election cycle. I remember in this state, when Jesse Helms was running, I think it was a Helms campaign, they sent postcards about change where your district was and intimidation if you'd moved, and when only the Black voters. But yeah, so these kind of, so have proper information and know what your plan is when you leave the house to go cast your vote, however you want to cast it.
Correct. All right, so what we'll do is I'll give each of you a chance to, any last remarks, any resources, anything you want to leave with the people on the call, and we'll start with, I look at the way my screen is, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Haney, and then Caitlin, you can close us out.
Well, I want to thank everybody again for being on this call. It's certainly it's a right for us to vote and for you all to be on this to listen to us, and certainly as you make that important decision to cast your ballot. And once again, Lawrence, I want to thank you and the good folks that you work with for putting this on. I will say again what I mentioned in my last answer, that well, the importance of voting, obviously, notwithstanding, but a barrier to voting often is just a lack of information. In North Carolina, we have one of the longest ballots in the country. We vote everything, treasurer, insurance commissioner, Department of Public Instruction, those are council of state seats, legislature. And this is an important election. They all are, but as Lawrence or someone said, maybe this is the most important of our lifetime. But it is important to vote the full ballot, but to be able to do that, obviously it can be a bit intimidating. And so I just would highly encourage folks to seek information where you can. And in I guess a bit of a self-serving way, I'll again plug this ncvoterguide.org, again, co-produced by Democracy North Carolina and Common Cause. Good place, nonpartisan information. But when you are getting ready to vote, do your homework if you can. Try to learn as much as you can about all those important races. I know the one at the top is what we all think about, but what affects our lives are some of these folks where I live in Raleigh who serve at the North Carolina General Assembly. So think about those races as well. So again, thank you so much for letting me be here with you this evening.
Yeah, let me also thank you, Lawrence, for having this, and thank you all for your organization for being interested in this. It's extremely important in the work that you're doing every day. Thank you for what you do for our kids in the classroom. And I'll say what Bob said, I just jotted down that these down ballot races are extremely important. We heard comments about the state board of elections, and we haven't expanded the days, early voting days. I think that comes about because the elections matter, right? And the state legislature is particularly important this election cycle. And we just had a census this year. This is a census year. We're going to be redrawing districts, right? And the legislature is key in this state in how the next set of districts will be drawn. And we know the shenanigans that have been going on, and we've been in the courts more than anything with our districts, more than any state. Who controls the legislature controls that process of drawing our districts. So do look at the ballot and vote those down ballot races. These things matter. Insurance rates, all these things matter. It matters if we have advocates in place that we can hold people accountable once they're elected. So do participate, educate folks, and vote the entire ballot. That's what I'll say. Thank you.
I was going to share my screen, but it's okay. So yeah, I thank you all so much for inviting me here today to speak, and thank your organization, Lawrence, for making sure that our for having us today. I guess I just want to say a couple other things in regards of talking about redistricting. Southern Coalition for Social Justice actually works with community organizations in order to train and equip individuals with the tools to monitor and engage with redistricting processes at every level of government, spot warning signs and take action if decisions are likely to infringe on the right to an equal opportunity to vote in our elections. And this is called the Crowd Academy, which stands for Community Redistricting Organizations Working for Democracy. And so it is so we're thinking, after the election, what comes next? And as Dr. Haney said, the redistricting. And redistricting matters so much because it impacts us for the next 10 years. And in order to make sure that your vote actually has meaning and that the people that we vote for are actually accountable, that all falls down to where our maps are drawn. And so what I would encourage everyone to do is to, after we, cast our ballot and come 2021, to become involved in the process of redistricting. This process might, seem secretive or maybe overwhelming or, not very adapt to, easily accessible. But the people who draw our maps are the ones who are in power, and that doesn't necessarily make sense. And so we need our communities to be educated and engaged and hold the people who are drawing our maps accountable. And so making sure that we're a part of the redistricting process. And if you're interested in finding out more information about redistricting or how you can become involved in the election process, please feel free to connect with us at Southern Coalition. You can just do a quick Google or on Facebook or on Twitter, and you can get a lot of amazing resources such as, we're connecting with Common Cause and making sure that you have all the proper information. Another thing I just want to spot before I end is that you can take the voter guide from Common Cause and you can actually print out a sample ballot and take that sample ballot to you with the polls if you're going to vote early. So rather than having to make that decision there on the spot, take an hour, take 2 hours, get that Common Cause the voter guide, print out a sample ballot, and you can take that sample ballot with you to the polls and make sure that everything is easy and doable for the way that you want to vote. Thank you.
Thank each of you for being on. I greatly appreciate it. This is good information. And I know that our listeners are so grateful for each one of you accepting the invitation to be here. So again, thank you. And for those that's listening, we will not have another conversation until after the election. It's on environmental climate justice, and we'll talk about that in November. So again, to the panelists, I am so appreciative of each of you being here. Thank you so much for your time and the great information you gave to us tonight. So thank you again. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you all.